I'm Donald Lindbergh. I'm Director of the National Library of Medicine. I have the privilege this morning to interview Dr. Ann Brooks from Tutwiler, Mississippi. This is in connection with the National Library of Medicine's outreach efforts, in which we make a special program to increase the access of health professionals to the automated information systems of the library. Dr. Brooks, thanks so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
I know you didn't come just for seeing an LM, you're here to be honored. Would you just spend a moment and tell us what that was all about?
Well, the Foundation for Christian Living has an annual award now that Dr. Vincent Peale has established. This is the second one, and it honors 6 ordinary Americans who are, as he says, unsung heroes. And it's a very great honor to have been chosen to receive one of these awards.
I'm sure well-deserved. You're an unsung hero indeed.
Well, I'm not sure that it's myself. I think the award really belongs to my staff and my patients.
Okay, now I have to follow up on exactly that, because you are doing a very wonderful thing. You are serving in a clinic which you established and now have others working with you as well in a small town in Mississippi, and you're providing health care to a disadvantaged population. Is that right?
That's very right.
Maybe I'm not saying it right. What does it sound like to you? What does it feel like to be there?
It feels wonderful to be there, actually. It's an area where there is rampant disease, in many cases nutritional, in other cases because of illiteracy or simply not having the oomph to go and get health care when you need it because you have no transportation, you have no money, and to be in the middle of that and to be able to be available to people is a privilege.
You made a statement to me a little bit earlier that I thought maybe you'd mention again, the need in your setting to actually have some audio visuals on how to give care to the infants in connection with trying to eliminate infant death in the first year of life.
It's very important for us to empower our patients by teaching them to care for themselves or their families. And as you know, our infant mortality rate is horrible. It's 23 out of every 1,000 babies die each year before they reach age 1. And I just can't abide that. So part of our effort in patient education is in the play program, for example, that we have for 2 to 4-year-olds, we mandate that parents must come and we try to teach them how to care for their children, how to look at growth and development. But we're dealing with an audience that is poorly educated and their vocabulary is limited. If I say to somebody, for example, okay, go ahead and get dressed, they'll say, well, can I put my clothes on? So phrasing that we are familiar with is not something that perhaps is a normal part of vocabulary. So in trying to teach parents, we need very basic tapes with simple language, multiracial tapes, things that will enable parents to learn how to take a temperature, how to give the Tylenol, how to bath the baby down if the fever is bad, what to do for cuts. I can't tell you how many cuts have turpentine in them. A child came in with an ear once that had ruptured tympanic membrane with turpentine in the ear, screaming, and the only reason she came is because she was screaming. So we have a lot of myths, and the effort to reach beyond the myth into good health care for the child now in our, quote, modern world, unquote, is very important to us.
Are the infants lost because they're weak at birth?
I really don't think so. We have a regional medical center near us, and we're getting kids born with APGARs of 9 and 10, and I am not convinced that that's the problem. I think the problem occurs after the child gets home. We have mothers who are on the WIC program, and they don't understand that WIC is a supplemental program, and they try to stretch the formula to last the entire month, or they don't have water in their houses, and then when they do get water, they may not dilute the formula enough, or they may not boil the water, and we have kids with diarrhea, and they're being fed sometimes twice a day because the mothers eat twice a day, and they think, well, if I'm going to eat, I've got to feed the baby. Other things, simply having the child sleep in a bad place, like in the bed with the mother on the edge of the bed, or on a couch at mommy's feet and on the floor. Or, I mean, nobody has heard of car seats for kids. I cannot tell you how many children are thrown from cars. It's a big tragedy when that occurs. And just a simple way of holding the child when you're in the car would be an enormous lifesaver.
We've just said a couple of medical things that maybe I'll translate. I happen to have been a student of Virginia APGAR, so I know what an APGAR score is, but some of our readers or listeners may not know that the APGAR of a 9 or 10 means that the child is in good shape at birth. Is that right?
That's right.
And WIC is Women, Infants, and Children, and that's a federal program that's meant to help people, but I think for what you're saying, it's having a negative impact. They're not doing breastfeeding because of the availability of these darn formulae.
It's culturally not good to breastfeed in our area, and I'm not sure how much of that has been influenced by WIC. But it's a tragedy because children are allergic like all get out.
It certainly is. What can be done?
A whole lot of education. I think the education, though, has to start in the school system with sex education in kindergarten. And I mean more than the birds and the bees, because these kids live in one-room places, and they know what goes on. And they need education not only of what sexuality is, but what makes a baby and how not to make a baby. And the fact that a woman doesn't have to acquiesce every time some guy comes around, whether it's a member of the family or not. And it's a big tragedy how much retardation there is because people have sex together who have the same father and don't even know it. So there's a whole lot to do.
So you find substantial inbreeding down there?
Yes, I'm afraid we do.
You've given up making family trees?
I did. It just simply got too complicated. But the tragedy of that is that the disparity between the father and the mother, the father can't be part of the family picture in many cases because the only survival is welfare. A mother and 2 children will receive $122 a month in Mississippi. If they have another child, they get $24 again, extra. They may also be on food stamps at 78 cents per person per meal, and this is how they survive. So the health in general, the diabetes, the hypertension, I'm sure a whole lot of that is nutritional, as well as the retardation.
Well, I think you're saying that the care that you're giving is, while wonderful, fits in with the general pattern of economics and education and wellness that leaves a lot to be desired.
For example, taking care of a hypertensive patient, the health department will provide hydrochlorothiazide, hydralazine, reserpine, clonidine, and those are my choices. Now, if I give someone hydrochlorothiazide and they have diabetes, I'm going to change their symptoms. I might give them gout. I certainly have to monitor their potassium. The ramifications of giving medicines are just enormous, plus the compliance rate, plus the generic, which we never know what we're going to get. And one time someone came to me with 3 bottles of white pills. And they took one of them once a day, and one of them twice a day, and one of them 3 times a day. And I didn't know which one they took 3 times a day or twice a day. So it makes it very intriguing.
Did you look on the little page in PDR? You actually can deduce it sometimes from the shape and the markings, but it's a little research effort.
Well, when it's generic, you have no
generic,
picture.
You can't, I see.
You see, that's the difficulty.
Oh, I'm out of contact with that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a mess.
Okay, well now, your good care is superimposed on a kind of a poor infrastructure. I should say to our listeners that the National Library of Medicine is, maybe we're doing something that well-intentioned and may or may not work, but we're trying to help you by superimposing on your good medical practice a kind of a rich infusion of information services. And so, of course, I'm very interested to hear you tell us how that's working out. But we thought that it would be a very desirable experiment to provide computers to you, and I was surprised to discover in talking with you already had the computers. So it was just a question of getting them in use, and access to the Medline and access to the reprint services and so forth. Because we do know that millions of times a year these services are used by other physicians, and that from the studies we've done, it appears that they are beneficial, they're helpful in terms of patient outcomes. Now, the question is, how does this play in Tutwiler? Are we doing any good for you? Are we doing any good for your patients?
How about last week? I had a young lady, age 22, walk in, and she said, I've got all these purple spots on me. And sure enough, she was just purpura all over. And she has lupus, and I could not remember whether lupoid people also can have thrombocytopenia, low platelets, so they don't clot their blood. And so here I am, plugging all this information in. I left before I got the answer because I did it the last thing Friday night, and she did indeed have to have a platelet transfusion. She was down to 3,000. But in terms of figuring out whether she had idiopathic thrombocytopenia purpura or whether it was actually due to lupus, her complement studies all came back normal. Her SED rate was fine. So hopefully it will not be something big and horrible, but something we can control. But that was a question that I asked, and I'm eager to see the answer.
Well, you know, when you and I were talking by telephone, I suppose perhaps close to a year ago, you made the point that impressed me very much, that if a person were to assume that ordinary people have ordinary problems, they're mistaken, because you found that the health problems of your population were really quite complex, and that you did have need for information.
I do, constant information, in fact, and just as an example, we were speaking earlier of my patient with leukemia. To diagnose leukemia and to say that it's myelogenous leukemia or myeloid, does it have a Philadelphia chromosome? What's the connection there? Is it chronic? Is it blastic? I don't know the implications of that, because 9 years ago, well, 12 years ago, I guess, when I was studying that in school, they had nowhere near the advances that they have now. So I feel like I'm a great distance from knowledge, but having this nice little program has really helped. I sound like a commercial, but I mean to be.
Well, I hope so.
I mean to be.
No, but I think you're right. I mean, you sound incredibly well informed, I must say. But I think nobody has to convince doctors that our information outdates very quickly. We have a tremendous need for continuing medical education and knowledge at the time we're seeing a patient. Sometimes I think the non-physicians believe too strongly that we can carry around in our heads all that we need to practice medicine.
No, my brain's too addled for that. Much too addled. But sometimes even the effects of medication that perhaps are not printed in the PDR yet because a supplement hasn't come out, or trends in resistance in antibiotics. For example, I had a child in the office last week, or perhaps the week before, with a temperature of 107 who had a urinary tract infection. It turned out that it was E. coli. Well, good old E. coli. I mean, that responds to everything, ho-ho. This one responded only to nitrofurantoin or to norfloxacin. Well, you can't give a 5-year-old norfloxacin, so there I was, measuring out 8 cc's and trying to convince her retarded mother to dish it out 4 times a day.
You spoke to me earlier about a patient you had just seen and whom you had to regrettably give a bad diagnosis, and who ended up kind of comforting you. I wonder if our listeners wouldn't enjoy knowing about that kind of person.
Well, this young man was 25 years old, and he worked at the state prison farm down the road from us, and came in not feeling well. The vital signs were pretty good. His temperature was just 100, and as I had told you earlier, we had horrible tonsillitis going around. So I figured, well, he was probably beginning to come down with that. He had some nodes in his neck. Tonsils were fine, and we did a blood count. And our lab machine, which is a Coulter counter basis, couldn't spit out a white blood count for me, and so I asked them to do a slide. And he had 50 very bizarre cells per high power field, or per oil immersion field, actually. And in the end, the count done by the hospital was 208,000 white cells. And so I had to sit down with Howard and tell him that he had leukemia. And when you tell a vibrant 25-year-old kid that he's got cancer of the bone marrow and try to explain, A, what is bone marrow, and try to use the word cancer so that a person can continue to hear what you say, it's kind of tricky. And I began to cry because I knew that Howard's life was not going to be the same, and he was going to have to leave his family and go to Memphis for treatment and everything. And he reached over and he just patted my knee and he said, "Hey, Doc, we're going to do this okay. We're going to come out all right." And that was a big gift to me.
Sure. He was helping you.
He was.
Yeah.
He was. My patients do it all the time.
Do they really?
I think that's what energizes me. You know, a lady comes in
Must be
and
something special.
It is. It is. I mean, my folks are cotton pickers, okay? So here's this old lady comes in bent and hobbling and in pain, and she's growling at everybody because she hurts, and she growled at me too. And so I tried not to growl back, and I said, "Lori, now we'll try this medicine for like 3 weeks, and I want you to come on back. And if you're fine, you don't need to come back, because, of course, transportation's a problem. But I really would like to know how you're doing." So I gave her a non-steroidal. At the moment, I don't recall even which one. I had office samples, and
We don't have a sponsor on this program.
that's
so
good.
That's all right.
But anyway, she came back in 3 weeks, and she was standing up straight and tall, and she looked at me. She says, "Doctor," she says, "even if you are white, I'm going to hug you." It was wonderful.
Good for her.
It was wonderful. I love hugs.
Now, some non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents are pretty expensive.
They're horribly expensive, and the only reason we can manage is because of donations. There's also some things I'm going to ask your computer, which has to do with ACE inhibitors and non-steroidal agents, because I understand there's a prostaglandin problem there. That ACE inhibitors seem to encourage prostaglandin production, and non-steroidals depress it. And
I have to plead
that can be
ignorance,
fairly
I'm sorry
tricky.
to say. But
Well-
we'll talk to the Medline computers.
Right.
Ask Grateful Med.
Yes, I will indeed ask that. But to go back to your original thought about the price of medication, it is disastrous for some people to try to stay alive. My diabetics on oral medicine can't make it on generics. So many of them are on insulin simply because the instability of a generic form, which is the only kind that Medicaid will approve. But the situation generally in our area is like, well, last fiscal year I did $402,000 worth of charges, and we received back $166,000 reimbursement. Now, some of that, 50% of my patients are Medicaid, Medicare. Some of that was private pay. About 3% was workers' comp. And there's a little gap there that somehow has to be changed. And I said that last night at the Kennedy Center. Some people have got to work for health care for people, everybody, not just a few.
I know it. I told you that we're doing a history of regional medical programs in the U.S., and I won't try to recap all those studies in a brief moment, but that was designed exactly to try to work towards eliminating those discrepancies and eliminating the gap between what's known at the centers, what's practiced at the bedside. I would say that you are practically a one-person army eliminating that gap.
Oh, I don't know if I'm an army, but
How many people work with you in your clinic?
I have about 22 on the staff. I have 3 RNs and 3 medical assistants, someone to work in the lab and someone to help sort donated medicine. We do tend to get some outdated stuff that we can't use, of course. But we're seeing 733 patients a month average from last January through June. We're only 4 doctors in the county, but I'm also drawing people from other cities who feel their doctors don't listen, and it's
Oh, just what you needed.
it's a tribute to me that I would take time to listen, and in many cases a referral to our counselor is what's in order, because the person is terribly stressed with whatever societal norms have placed on them, or what breakup in their own family or their own psyche is happening at the time that makes them unable to recover their health.
You're using a lot of very modern terms. Somehow I picture the place as being much more, I don't know, idyllic and Faulknerian and beautiful. Is that accurate?
You're accurate. I remember very clearly the day a lady called me up and told me she had trouble with her AGNP, and I thought, oh, my whole and body, I don't know what on earth a AGNP is. And so I sat there, I said, AGNP. It wasn't weasels and it wasn't gravels, and I knew what weasels and gravels were, but AGNPs I hadn't encountered. So I said, well, tell me, Bertha, tell me about your AGNP. Well, it hurts, ma'am. And I said, well, what happened that it hurts? I don't know, ma'am. It just hurts. My AGNP is bothering me. So I thought, well, I better start at the beginning. I said, are you breathing? Yes, ma'am. Is your heart flooding? No, ma'am. Heart's not flooding. Bertha, tell me when your AGNP started hurting. Well, it's when I got in the car and we hit the bridge. And it was her leg and hip.
Ah.
And she indeed had broken her hip.
Oh, my goodness.
And so sure, her AGNP hurt.
My goodness.
But it did take a little time to figure that one out.
Yeah, the local translation of some of the lay expressions of medical terms is really amusing. If there aren't books written on it, there should be.
That's quite true.
There was one my wife and I heard at the Columbia Presbyterian that I've never forgotten. That was the patient who told us about her child having the smiling mighty Jesus.
Oh, yes.
You know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
And then we have fireballs, the Eucharist. We have all kinds of things. You know, the thing that you just recalled to my mind is what's happening in our fields with the things that we're spraying. I know we're still using arsenate on the cotton. We're still using defoliant on the cotton. I don't know whether it's related to some of the Agent Orange stuff or not. And I am wondering what's happening to my patients. They stand in the field with a flag so the plane will know where to stop spraying. But you can't tell me they stop in time for the person with the flag. I've had friends bicycling along the road when the planes have been going over and have come home with horrible sinusitis. A patient the other day was convinced he had been poisoned. It turned out it was fertilizer, but fertilizer has some not so nice things in it too. And I'm just wondering, is anybody addressing the agricultural chemical problem? That, to me, is a big challenge.
Well, we in the National Library of Medicine will always tend to give you these slightly indirect answers, but we are, in fact, starting just now a long-range plan having to do with toxicology and the environment.
Good.
Because there are several score of databases having to do with chemicals and their adverse effects on persons and the environment and so forth that NLM has been committed to since 1967. So we look now for kind of guidance. Next 20 years, how big will the problem be? What part of it should we be responsible for? How to overcome the obstacles that stand between us and those goals? We're worried about what you're talking about. I'm not sure that we could quickly whip in on the article that's going to give the answer, but we can whip in on the factual database that helps people know the effects of a particular chemical, its interactions, how to handle spills, how to handle people who are exposed to those spills. So those kind of things the literature does help us on. But I think the problem you draw attention to needs a heck of a lot of on-the-ground medical investigation. Yeah.
Yes, it's true. We have some chemicals being used.
What will happen about that?
I don't know. I do know that the farm lobby is very, very powerful. And as an example, not long ago in a little town south of us, a very wealthy farmer who owns 1,200 acres of plantation, cotton and rice and soybeans.
Can you make a living on 1,200 acres?
Excuse me, it's 12,000.
Oh, 12,000.
My mistake.
Yeah.
No, you can't on 1,200.
No.
But I'm not sure he can on 12,000 either, the way prices are sometimes. But in any case, he had stashed some illegal chemicals, and he had sprayed his fields. They're very, very good, potent chemicals. And by golly, it rained for 3 days, and all of a sudden all the fish went belly up in the bayou. And he was very helpful. You know, he's on the town council and sent his men to help clean up the mess. And it turned out that he had indeed stashed this chemical, which was now outlawed. And nobody got too excited because all the farmers had outlawed chemicals that they were still using. He just happened to get caught. Well, he got fined $50,000. That was just a slap on the wrist. The fellow who sprayed from the plane lost his license for life. But the planter, no big deal. And, you know, you see the fish go belly up. All right, now, people do fish from that stream. How soon can they go back fishing? What kinds of toxins are we going to have? How many other guys need a little amnesty to return their no-good chemicals anymore?
That's a good thought.
They're not going to turn them in. They're going to use them. But if they had amnesty, perhaps they would. And there's the whole thing of people going out to chop cotton with no source of being able to go to the bathroom. I have women terribly dehydrated. They will not drink before they go to the field. They chop all day. $23 a day they get. Give $8 to the driver who brought them up. They are allowed to drink only when they get to the end of the row near the drinking jug, and all it is water. You're not allowed to bring any jugs into the field with you. So it's not a good situation.
That's a hard day's work.
Well, get OSHA out there. See if they can't change that. There is a law somewhere in the migrant laws about having a porta-john, but they won't touch it. People are afraid they won't get their jobs if they make noises like that.
Tell me, what sort of illnesses predominate?
The illnesses that predominate are diabetes and hypertension.
Okay, and from the point of view of information sources, I'm happy that whatever it is we're doing is of some use to you.
It's terrific.
Oh, thank you. What might we do that would be more use?
I think the hang-up right now is my knowledge of how to put information into the computer. I am one of those people who managed not to learn computers as they were growing up and have
there's
perhaps
no
in the last
instruction
4
for American
years
doctors. That's another problem.
Just tried to learn how to do different programs. I tried to learn how to do the office program to input like, you know, the payments and the charges of patients, and they finally said, Dr. Brooks, get off the computer, you're making a mess. So I have learned to do a word processor and small things like that, but I feel that my limitation is not the limitation of the program, it's a personal limitation and just not knowing well enough how to express myself. And we were speaking of that on the way from the hotel this morning about how to refine the words I put in so that I don't get lost in the fog. Like I had put in menopause and cancer and hormones. And it turns out the hormones was the kicker, because in the review it wasn't expressed as hormones, it was expressed as estrogen, so I came up with a zip.
Yeah.
But those are those little tricky things.
Yes, actually Unified Medical Language System is sort of aiming at that. So we're aware of that problem. I think that is a really major problem. The other part is whether the literature actually exists. I mean, for instance, this question you raised about the agricultural chemicals, I'm sure there's much in the literature on it, but I wouldn't guarantee that it had just what you wanted.
Well, the other part about agricultural chemicals is my lack of knowledge of what the chemical is.
Yeah.
And how do I say a brand name into a computer, which perhaps has this 90 million long chemical name with 2s and 3s and paras and all that in it. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah,
now, of course,
I have a engineering colleague who refers to all that as ethyl methyl terrible.
I think he's right. Ethyl methyl terrible. That's good.
But most of us don't know those chemical names. That's quite true. So that's another obstacle, and it's kind of a linguistic obstacle.
Another thing is something, for example, this young lady who came in with the purpura. She had finished a course of Flagyl probably 3 weeks ago. Flagyl is a medication that always raises a red flag in my head.
Yeah.
But I did not have the time, being Friday afternoon, hurrying to get to the plane to get out here, to pursue that as a possible interaction that might have caused her platelets to decrease.
I doubt it, but it's an interesting idea, Shirley. You had to hurry up to be honored. Well, that probably won't. That's a good thing to do. How might anyone who listens to this tape help you in your organization? What to do?
What to do? Good question. At the moment, one of our biggest projects is to create a community education center. We're teaching in the back room of our building, which is really a children's waiting room, a 12 by 23 foot room, 2 to 4-year-old play program that meets 2 mornings a week, an 8 to 13-year-old program for prevention of child sexual abuse. We have people who are quilting to try to earn some money by selling quilts through the mail. We can't do it all in one room. And so the Community Education Center would enable people of both races to come together, celebrate family functions, as well as have educational programs. And that's our thrust right now, is to get this old building. Kellogg Grant has given us $200,000, and we're responsible for the rest of it.
What's the rest?
Oh, the architect's talking about $488,000.
Okay, well, so money is one thing then.
Money is a very versatile thing. It helps
But I
us
guess
provide gas.
drugs, huh?
We are receiving
used to you?
medications from a lot of physicians around the country, which just is such a gift. We share those with other clinics. For example, beta blockers sometimes are not helpful in black hypertensives because of the low renin. And we will share those with other clinics. And in reality, we are actually helping 45 different clinics with the medications that are donated to us.
How many of those have email? With how many could you communicate by computer? How many colleagues can you reach with your computer?
I have no idea.
Oh, well, we have to work on that.
But the problem that we have also is that in our regional medical center, we have no oncologist. We have only 3 general surgeons, 2 pediatricians, and 1 orthopod. We just lost the urologist.
This is in some other bigger...
This is 15 minutes from where I live. And so when I have a patient with cancer and I have questions, I have to call and try to find some attending in some school who may not call me back for 3 and 4 days.
Yeah.
Same thing with a hematologist. I call up a friend in Texas who's very good at calling me back, but still I don't have information at my fingertips.
Yeah, email is a bit of a help in that way, because
Yeah.
the person can answer in the nighttime, and regardless of the time and the zones. Okay, well, you've left us a lot of problems to work on, but I congratulate you on all the progress you've made on your own, and I thank you for being with us.
It's
Dr.
my
Brooks.
pleasure again.
Please come back.
Thanks for having me.